All right. Can everybody hear me out there in the public? Thank you. Welcome to the August 16th, 2021 Board of Directors meeting for MSAD 51. We will first start with approval of minutes for July 19th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
I just wanted to make a note that under the committee reports, the first item A, finance, it is an incomplete sentence, so we should probably amend that. It states that Kevin Desmond reported that the Finance and Facilities Committees will meet next week to, what was that update?
I think I wore them out. That was just to have that discussion on the plan of financing
Okay.
Between both committees.
Okay.
Can you please speak, guys speak up? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Sure, absolutely. Is that better?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go again.
Please.
That was that meeting was pulling together both committees to talk about the plan of financing for the new building. Good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So all in favor of the amended minutes for July 19th, 2021? Thank you. All right, moving into public comment. I see that we have some members of the public here. Same rules as always. We ask that you state your name and town that you live in, and also respect that there are others to speak, and I will ask you to stop speaking after 3 minutes. So anyone is welcome to approach the podium.
Hey, my name is Arnie Mestis. I first of all want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and thank you for all the jobs that you folks are doing. I know it's an enviable position that really cannot please everyone all the time. I'd like to just read something, if I may, an article I've recently read from somebody named Addison Reeves. And the title of it is It's Just 2 Weeks. It's just 2 weeks. It's just staying 3 feet apart. It's just staying 6 feet apart. It's just not going outside. It's just not giving handshakes. It's just working from home. It's just non-essential businesses that are closed. It's just bars, it's just restaurants, it's just theaters, it's just concerts, it's just dancing, it's just intramural sports, it's just choir. It's just non-essential medical services that you have to give up. It's just non-essential items that you're not allowed to buy. It's just not being able to exercise. It's just gyms. It's just closure of your business for a while. It's just not making money for a while. It's just not being able to pay your bills for a while. It's just a minor inconvenience. It's just not being allowed to carpool. It's just not socializing for a while. It's just a mask. It's just not traveling for a while. It's just not hugging people for a while. It's just not seeing your family and friends for a while. It's just not visiting your grandparents temporarily. It's just your grandparents not having visitors for their safety. It's just one birthday you have to sacrifice. It's just one Thanksgiving alone. Just one Christmas without your family. It's just 2 birthdays you had to sacrifice. Just not celebrating any milestones for 1.5 years. It's just temporary. It's just a safety measure. It's just your ability to pay cash. It's just contact tracing. It's just a health screening. It's just a temperature check. It's just a scan of your face. It's just a minor loss of privacy. It's just 1 semester. It's just 2 semesters. It's just 1 year out of your child's life. It's just high school graduation. It's the birth of your grandchild that you missed. It's not being able to be there for your relatives that are ill or dying. It's just 1 vaccine. It's just 1 set of booster shots. It's just regular booster shots. It's just another 2 weeks. Just 1 more lockdown, 1 more week, twice tops. Pretty simple, no? But when you add up all the justs, it amounts to our entire lives. For over 1.5 years, counting, we and our children have been robbed of the ability to live our lives fully, to make meaningful choices for ourselves, and to express our values the way we see fit. It is just the inability to express our humanity in the total negation of our very selves. All of these measures have served as a prohibition of expressing outwardly one's valid and complex internal reality. This kind of suppression of self does violence to one's very soul. All of these supposedly little and supposedly short-lived justs have transformed us into totalitarian states from which there appears to be no endpoint. That's the end of the article. Now me.
I'm sorry, your 3 minutes is up. If you could just,
If I can have 30 seconds.
thank you.
The CDC has gotten this wrong from the beginning, folks. They said just 2 weeks, 15 days, to flatten the curve. They say they are following the science, but they refuse to listen to scientists and renowned doctors that disagree with their narrative in any way. That is not science. That is tyranny. True science listens to all other scientists and looks at every possible solution with integrity. Dr. Fauci said in a video in 2017 on camera that it wasn't a matter of if, but when we would have a pandemic, and that he predicted it would happen in this president's term, meaning Trump. That same Fauci was in Wuhan in 2017 doing gain-of-function research.
Okay.
He's lied to Congress about it, and he's been caught on it. I implore you, folks, be leaders. The CDC is not God. They are not the Constitution of this country, and they are not the ones to tell us what to do. They are not the law. Be leaders and stand up for our kids. I implore you, and I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Julie Mcdonald from North Yarmouth. I'd like to say congratulations, first of all, to everyone on their new seat, and congrats to all those who won another term. I don't have any prepared remarks tonight. I just want to talk about the masking, especially in the high school. Jeff, you and I have, communicated about this. I believe your sincerity that you're not a fan. I'm just asking for you folks to sit back and maybe dig a little deeper and look at a little more evidence. When we can take our kids out to dinner and sit at a restaurant for 2 hours unmasked, right? But they can't sit in class unmasked. It's hard for me to understand how that makes sense. It's hard for me to tell them, yeah, you can go here, there, and to this place and that place unmasked, but when you sit in school 7 hours a day, you're going to have to be masked. And kids who, by high school, are no longer kids, as you all know, can see sort of that dichotomy. Well, I can go to this restaurant with my friends and hang out unmasked, but I can't sit in my classroom unmasked. And especially in the heat of September and October, imagine trying to sit and focus and learn, right, in the heat of the day and additionally behind those masks. The only other thing I'd like to ask, I've sent several articles regarding masking and more recent and updated information. These are from scientists who have published in journals like The Lancet, which is a world-class medical journal. There's more and more evidence to show that masks do literally nothing to stop the spread of COVID-19, but are in fact harmful when kids are rebreathing that moist, dirty air in their mask all day, every day while they're in school. Now, I have training in statistics. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I have a bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Pennsylvania. And so I do understand, a little more than the average Joe on how to read statistics and how to read these medical journals and what eye to use to look at them with. I have sent all the board members, I believe, I don't know if I had the proper updated list, but I think I have sent everybody at least 50 more recent journal articles talking about the limitations to masking, what it actually doesn't do, and the harm that it actually does do. So I'm just asking, especially at the high school level, and even all kids age 12 and older, I don't know what to do about the kids who haven't been able to have the vaccine yet. and I don't envy you in that regard. But for kids who've been vaccinated, there is no science saying that they need to be vaccinated and masked all day, every day at school. And there is indication, though, that the masking does do harm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Charlie Devine. I live in North Yarmouth, and I'm a rising 7th grader. No, I'm rising. I'm an 8th grader, whatever you want to call it. I've been a student at Greeley since 3rd grade, and I've gotten to know the people and community very well. And let me just say, I enjoy all the people and staff working at the building and the administration. I'm not here to tell you what you're doing wrong, or to tell you how angry I am. I'm only here to ask you some questions. I now know that we all have to wear masks in school again this year due to the Delta variant. Masks do not make me want to pass out or make me ill. I have nothing against wearing masks. I do, however, have something against wearing them for non-valid reasons. As a student, I saw everything that happened during the 2020-2021 school year. I witnessed things that made me question the legitimacy of the mask requirement. Of course, for lunch, we have to take our masks off to eat. At the beginning of the year, instructions were given to us to not face anyone else and to face forward and not talk. This is so that we do not spread the virus by talking to people around us. Most classes would watch a movie or a show to pass the time. My class, however, did not have that luxury. We had an older teacher who didn't know how. This forced us to make each other as a way to pass time. And let me tell you, by the time Christmas break came around, those rules had washed away. Kids were talking, throwing food, sharing food, even making physical contact. I even saw multiple accounts of kids spitting on each other on purpose because they thought it was funny. I thought this was... In the first half of the year, there were usually teachers monitoring and watching us. This was so we would follow those rules. After the Christmas break, they went away. I guess they thought we had, adapted. There were barely any supervisions of the kids. And on one account, a teacher even came in and had a class-wide argument with us on why it is not okay to do this. After she left, one kid closed the door, covered it up with shades, and said, "Let's break the rules, it's time." For the rest of the class, we were talking with each other, throwing food, and even spitting. And what I found most interesting about this is that this lasted from about January to the end of the school year. And during that time, there were 0 shutdowns due to COVID. So, in the 6-month range that no kids followed any COVID guidelines, the school was not shut down at all. This made me think maybe masks aren't totally required because on these multiple accounts of people not wearing them, we're not shutting down. Another thing I'd like to address is the guidelines put in place. I question some of their logistical statics. Like, for one example, in the stairway, there are one-way zones, which means you can only go up one way and down one way. This I thought was absolutely absurd because when all the kids would come in from outside, there would be dozens of kids smushed into one side of the stairway going up, which would force other kids to sprint up the other side before the teacher was catching them, me included. Luckily, I never got caught, but some kids did. And some of them only did it for their own safety, which was funny because the guidelines were put in there for our own safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Board. Scott Jordan, Cumberland. First, I want to thank Arnie and Julie for what they said earlier. Your job is thankless. Also, congratulations to the new members. What I'd like to do first is, being a former military and coming from a family military, I'd like to say the pledge, and then being a man of faith, I'd like to say the Lord's Prayer. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our Father, you're welcome. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forget our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. I'm a little nervous because I'm a little angry. I feel like I'm grieving, like probably all of you have grieved at one point in your life, or maybe many times. I'm going to give you an example of hypocrisy. Former President Obama just held a birthday party for 300 individuals, of which 200 were caterers, and they had to mask up, while the other 100 members, including the Obamas, did not. Think about that for a second. Let it marinate for a minute. And Black Lives Matter Action Week. That is outside the bounds assigned to the committee and the school board district. Your continued stance of ensuring queer and transgender experiences are respected and safe, and inferring that by not affirming this is intolerance and unacceptable. I agree to disagree. Jeff, if students want to be taught about organizations like the KKK or the Hells Angels, could they be? Would they be? I ask not because I support those organizations, but it seems like educating our impressionable youth through glamorizing a Marxist and racist organization, such as Black Lives Matter, is extremely dangerous. Tyler, Ann, Jeff, how do you think Bill Shane and the employees of this town would feel if everyone in this room decided to withhold, conveniently, their escrow accounts, decided not to pay their taxes? How do you think they'd feel? How do you think that man right there, who represents and takes care of us, would feel if he didn't get a paycheck because of your decisions? The school district's overreach seems to be an underlying issue that this community needs to stand up and respectfully speak against. The idea of teaching our children how to live side by side with someone that they don't align with is not the task of the school board. It's the task of the parents. It is our responsibility.
Scott, your 3 minutes is up.
Is my 3 minutes up? Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak?
Hi, I'm Nick Danbury. I live in Cumberland. I have a 5-year-old in kindergarten. And I wasn't going to say anything tonight, but I was sitting with him at dinner table, and he asked me where I was going. I said I was going to go to the school board because more people need to be involved. Unprompted, unrequested, he said, "Can you ask them that I don't wear a mask to school this year?" He's 5. He's repeating kindergarten because he had such a horrible experience last year. I'm sorry, I want my son to enjoy school. I want to have him have a good experience. I moved from Portland so my son could come to this community and work and go to this school and become educated. I know you're in a hard position, and I know you can see all the science and you can all make your own decisions, but I think the parents should be allowed to decide if their kid comes to school in a mask or not. I don't feel that my son is at risk, and that's my opinion. I just want him to enjoy this experience, and it's not been enjoyable. And I don't know what else to do for him except be his voice. And I don't envy you, and I appreciate your time that you're giving to the community, but I really hope you look at all of the angles and try to think of the kids, because there's statistically 0% chance that they're going to die from this. We didn't do anything from the flu, and I don't need to go into any of that. You all have seen it and heard it and read it, but I just wish you would think about these kids and how much they're not liking this experience. At least my child is not. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Andrea Berry. I live in North Yarmouth. I'm the mother of a 7th grader, a rising 7th grader, and my husband works at MIW. I'm here to emphatically support the mask mandate for the school year. To me, with the risk of the Delta variant and the contagiousness of that variant, this seems like the most logical and thoughtful way to keep us at school 5 days a week throughout the school year. So I really do encourage you to move forward with the mask mandate for this next school year. What I am also here today to talk about is the scheduling of the first day of kindergarten on the Jewish high holiday of Rosh Hashanah. Back in March, I alerted some school board members about this issue, and I know that the superintendent's office was contacted, and I was assured that the schedule would be reorganized. For those of you who don't know what Rosh Hashanah it is the beginning of the Jewish New Year and is one of 2 high holidays which Jews around the world do not come to work, they don't go to school. Many of them go to synagogue and practice a thoughtful process of thinking about goals for the new year and reflecting on the previous year. Asking families to choose between observing their religion and choosing to send their child for their very first day of school is not a fair choice. It's not an appropriate choice. And even though Jewish families in our community are a small percentage of the overall school population, I just want to be very clear about the extreme lack of welcome, let alone the harm that projects for Jewish families. I contacted the school district back in March. Then again, when we were sent the reminder last week about the first day of kindergarten, because I was shocked that it hadn't been moved. And I do want to appreciate you, Superintendent Porter, for going back and forth with me today and over the last few days. And I recognize that there is effort to move this away from the holiday. But I just want to be very clear. It should not be my responsibility as a parent to identify when the holidays are. They are on the school district's website, and you can find them all the way through 2030 and beyond. And not only the Jewish holidays, but the key Muslim holidays, as well as any other holidays that are observed by students and teachers and staff in this district. It is really important, if you are committed to equity, to think about that fully in the way that you present the full school year to our students. And I do implore you, for the major holidays, for all of the religions that are followed within our school district, like you would never schedule the start of something, the end of something, a test, a sports game on Christmas or Easter, not to do that for the other holidays as well. If we're tolerating the Lord's Prayer in a public school board meeting, the least you can do is be thinking about moving the first day of kindergarten. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Simpson. I live in Cumberland. First, I want to thank you all for serving. You make difficult decisions and I appreciate it. I especially want to thank Ann and Tyler and Jeff, who were called out earlier. I appreciate you specifically today. Maine, Cumberland, we're not the first ones to start up school this fall. Hundreds of districts around the country have already started up, many of them in southern states that do not have any mask mandates and in fact have banned mask mandates. So there are states that have run the unmasked experiment for us already, and so I would urge us to learn from their experience. A couple quick examples with a very quick web search of news stories in a few southern states. Pickens, South Carolina, Pickens County, South Carolina, has gone virtual after cases spiked to 162 cases, including 2 teachers on ventilators. In Jacksonville, Florida, over the first few days of school, positive tests increased at an exponential rate from 2 positive tests on day 1 to 82 cases in just 4 days. Those are just 2 very quick examples. There are many others. If you search the internet, which other folks tonight have been referring to, So there are definitely reasons to have children be masked. There are a lot of unvaccinated children who are not even qualified to be vaccinated yet. It would be folly to have to go back to virtual learning because we have decided we don't want to have masks in our schools. So strongly urge you to continue and move forward with the mask mandate as long as there are many, many unvaccinated people in our schools. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Susan Smith, and I live in North Yarmouth and have a child in the school district. Thank you for your efforts ensuring our kids are back to school this fall. I'm speaking tonight to ask that you let our youth return to an environment that is full of creativity and rich learning opportunities and not one filled with fear and dread. Our children have lost significant educational opportunities over the last year and a half. More concerning is the stress that our children are under. Mental health issues are off the chart now with our kids. We are trying to protect them from a virus that has shown to have over a 99% recovery rate. Serious issues with COVID are less likely for kids than they are with the typical flu. Yes, if we look at case numbers, those are up, but we're testing people who are often unsymptomatic. And that is skewing the numbers. Those who have underlying health issues are at a greater risk. So rather than encourage all to eat well, exercise, take vitamins, and focus on stress reduction, we're looking at having our kids in a stressful environment for the third school year now. There's no reason to force masks on our kids. Numerous studies have shown that they do little, if anything, to protect from our virus, and that's if it's worn 100% correctly, which little kids aren't going to do. Studies have shown that cognitive development is delayed with mask wearing. Children learn from facial expressions, and it's hard to hear your teacher and your fellow classmates when they're masked up. Brown University just came out with a study showing that babies and young children's IQs have dropped 20% since the start of COVID. Kids need to work in groups, they need to interact with each other, talk to friends at lunchtime, see a classmate or a teacher's smile. We are depriving them of all these integral parts of their development. I keep hearing that we're trying to protect our children, but we need to look at the fact that in trying to protect them from a virus that's never going away, we are causing them great harm. This needs to stop. We need to stand up for our kids. If parents want their children to wear a mask, that is their choice. But families who do not want their child wearing a mask that has been shown not to do much at all for reducing viral transmission, should not be forced. This is a decision for families, not the state or the school board. Please return our kids to a normal school year. Enough of not letting our kids live life in what has been proving to be a failed attempt at stopping a virus. Get them outside as much as possible. Encourage hand washing. Parents, if your kids are sick, keep them home. But do not make our kids try to learn in an environment of fear. Back to normal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, guys and gals. Good to see you guys back up there. Summer is great, but we all need some routine, I think. And I'm very much looking forward to the start of the school year and would love to see this year go as close to normal as possible. I think I would like to stress that there were a few things said about mask wearing. I've emailed you all, you know where I stand there, and it's okay to agree to disagree, but I think the number one thing I want to stress tonight is that the mental health of my children specifically, of course, right, I'm closest to them, they need more than just not necessarily wearing the mask. They need to be interacting with their peers. Small groups are fine, but we cannot be isolated for another year, sitting at a desk looking forward. I think we can all speak here. We've had pretty good summers. We're mingling with smaller groups of people, some people big groups, I'm sure. A lot of unmasked, and I haven't caught COVID yet, so I mean, I just think we can relax a lot more than we did last year. I know it's a crazy virus, and I know some people are really afraid of catching it. I understand that. But the kids need a little less fear, like we heard, a little less tense, anxious school days, because my kids really struggled with the 2 days of the intense masking, and they struggled with 3 days of screens. They just need to be in school, walking around with some friends and some teachers, smiling, laughing, learning, and being together as kids and teenagers should be. So as close as we can get, I would greatly appreciate it. And thank you again, and enjoy the last 2 weeks of summer.
Thank you. Do you want to tell me when you hit the timer button, and we'll hit it at the same time?
Well, you know, that would be great.
Okay,
All right.
ready?
3, 2, 1, go. George Spino, Cumberland, father of 4 kids, 3 of which are in the system. Cloth masks are ineffective. They're a comfort blanket at best. How many people here know someone who wore a mask and still got COVID? I know 3 of them. It's aerosolized, not just in the droplets. 3 studies sponsored by the NIH have shown this. Dr. Michael Ostrom said on TV that cloth and paper masks don't work to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus. He said, if you were in a room with somebody smoking, would you smell it in the device that you're using? The COVID viral particle is 100 nanometers. The gaps in a mask like this are 1,000 times that size. Cloth masks, up to 5,000. There's no difference in resultant mandates. Sweden kept their schools open, and it follows the same trajectory as everyone else. They're close to 0 daily COVID deaths. A Danish study in November 2020 no statistical difference between mask wearers and non-mask wearers. While a mask would stop larger droplets, people like that, they're going to stay home. Viruses circulate all year, and they cause problems when our immune systems are reduced. SARS-CoV-2 has animal reservoirs. We're not going to get rid of it like we did smallpox. It's like the common cold and the flu. Lewiston is rejecting mask mandates, making it optional for families. The Roman Catholic Church in Maine is also keeping their mask policy to a recommendation. The risk of damage of mental health of our children, they are at far more risk for that than they are for COVID. We're having our students live in a place where every neighbor, every friend is a deadly threat. This is red alert constantly. A group of parents in Gainesville, Florida sent 6 masks and 2 controls for laboratory analysis. 5 masks were contaminated, including 3 which had dangerous bacteria. No viruses were detected on any of the masks, even though the test was capable of detecting them. I call for any member of this school board who votes for a mask mandate to commit to wear a mask for 35 hours a week, like you're forcing all our children to do. Failure to do this reeks of privilege. We have never done anything like this before for colds or the flu, the latter of which is far more dangerous to children. Why are we going stricter on this? Jeff, in your letter, you told everyone they had to do one thing and then called for unity. If we decided to say masks are banned and then call for unity, that would be absurd as well. Instead, unity comes from respecting someone who's different from you. Not just superficially, but deep down inside, their perspective, the choices they make. Want to foster unity? Allow masks to be a choice. Encourage our children to respect those that think differently from them. N95s and KN95s are widely available and can help protect the wearer. I know every one of you up on that stage loves our children dearly. You have the chance to be a hero here and to stand up for the choice of every family in this community. You have the opportunity to show that even when we disagree, we can respect one another. Diversity does not come from stripping away all the differences and enforcing uniformity. No.
George.
It comes from a deep understanding that the other person is as worthy of respect as I am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Leanne Candor. I live in North Yarmouth. I have 2 kids in the district. Probably this helps indicate why I might be standing here. I am so grateful for everyone sitting on this stage. I can't imagine how hard of a job this has been throughout the pandemic, and welcome to the new members who, agreed to join. For me, the most important thing going into this year is having our kids there 5 days a week, and I am, and my kids are willing and want to know what they can do to maintain that 5 days a week. So I am much more interested in hearing about the data and the measures and the metrics that would say what it's going to keep us at that 5 days. And so starting with the mask mandate and understanding what it would mean to be able to drop it. I'm interested in the data of our district, our teachers, and our kids that are vaccinated. I think we live in probably one of the highest vaccinated communities in the country, which is amazing. But I also know the Delta variant has brought a lot of cases to our communities, and I would like to see what we can do to get back in the safer zone. And so if that means starting the school with masks and making sure that we can maintain low rates of transmission in our community and setting our goals and standards for what it would be for us to then stop being masked, that's what I would love to hear about how that's going to be obtained. My kids are probably the best mask wearers I know. Again, they're on the younger side, so maybe once they get older, they'll not, always do exactly what they're asked to do. Not that they do, they're 10 and 12, but they are very good about it. They know how meaningful it is to be able to be in school. And so I'm really just hopeful that we can create the environment that makes them feel safe to start in a safe way, which in our family and our community has been wearing masks. They did a very good job last year. I know it's been harder because most of us have not been wearing them recently. But then I would really want to know what we can do to then stop wearing them. I'm hopeful that transmission rates will go back down and that we'll get the Delta variant under control. But until that is in place, I do think starting with the masks on and then understanding that we aren't going to go to shutdowns or what it would take, what does the contract tracing look like this year. It's so devastating when you get something started and you get this routine and then you're shut back down again, and I really do not want to see that. So thank you for all the hard work, and thank you for making the recommendation so far that we continue with the masks, and I would like to know what then we can do to potentially change that going forward.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? This is really close. Okay. I just want to say thank you to everybody that has come and spoke respectfully and shared. This is not an easy situation for any of us, including the public. We all are going through this together. I also just want to make a note in regards to the comment about our calendar. That was something that as chair I approved and did not pick up on. And so I want to own that, and I appreciated what you said, and it is our responsibility to make sure that those things are taken care of. So as chair, I will take full responsibility for that, and it sounds like Jeff is looking at solutions. I know that holiday has come a lot earlier this year than it usually does, and I think that was one of the challenges that our district had faced with that, but I just wanted to acknowledge your comments and say thank you for reminding us of our responsibilities. So we will then move on to our presentation this evening, which is Superintendent Porter will do the Greeley Goes Green adjustments that we will be learning about and then voting on a little bit later in the evening. And do we know, are we seeing it at the screen as well?
We should be able to see it on both screens.
Okay.
Dirk, I've got this. Okay.
Yes.
Can everybody see over us? Yeah.
All right, so good evening. Thank you. I'm going to be talking about some recommendations tonight to the Greeley Goes Green plan, which the board approved back in June. And obviously, tonight, talking about adjustments, potential adjustments to this plan that the board will want to consider this evening. And just to reiterate, we are looking at obviously a full return, a resuming of full-time in-person learning starting in 2 weeks on September 1st for the vast majority of our students. And I appreciate Andrea, thank you for bringing that forward. That was an error and oversight on our part. Typically that holiday I think is later in the month. And we're trying to see if there's anything that we can do at this point. But just, I'm looking forward to 5 days. I think just virtually everybody is. Even students last year who said they weren't wild about school, were ready to get back to a routine, and I think that says a lot. I'm reiterating some information that people already know, but just for the sake of putting this out. Governor Mills, at the end of June, declared that the civil emergency in Maine was over, and I think a lot of people rejoiced in taking those masks off and not having to wear masks for the last at least 6 weeks. 3 weeks later, however, I believe it was July 18th, the US CDC released their new guidance in advance of the new school year. Part of their guidance said that universal indoor masking for all teachers, staff, students, and visitors, they were recommending it for all K through 12 schools, regardless of vaccination status. And the Maine Department of Education and the Maine CDC adopted the US CDC's guidance and strongly recommended that all Maine schools adopt that guidance for the fall of 2021. And this information will be going out to parents as well, depending on any adjustments the board makes tonight. So the role of the public health authorities, in a public school system is, it's very important. We pay attention to the role of the public health authorities. In our case, that would be the Maine Department of Education, which obviously looks at the Maine CDC and the Maine Health and Human Services Department for guidance, and then schools, whether it's a recommendation or requirement, weigh that information as to what they want to do next. And, there's a lot of information out there. I think I've read a lot about the Delta variant and other variants that might be coming along. I think there's a lot of conflicting evidence right now. There's a lot of information about Delta variants that you could find on both sides of it. I found information on both sides of some of these very reputable organizations as well. The AAP, Harvard Medical, Yale Medical, depends on the researcher, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic. I know that there are researchers in any organization that are looking at this from different angles. Someone mentioned the metrics for adjusting the Greeley Goes Green plan. I think the metrics are really, really important. What we don't want to go through is a year like the 2020-21 school year where basically I think we were in it for the long haul as the pandemic, again, we were gaining information about the pandemic, and there was an assumption that there was one way of doing things. And I think that obviously we cannot continue doing that. We're going into the third school year being affected by COVID-19 and all the related variants that come along. So these are the metrics that the district uses and has been using for some time. Some are new and some are old. Again, the guidance from the public health authorities, the DOE and the CDC. The DOE now has, which is through the federal CDC, a community transmission tracker, and I've got these links and people can go to them. I'm sure people have already started going to them. In Cumberland County right now, and this has changed literally over the last week, from moderate to substantial, but the transmission data, and again, this is countywide, not Cumberland, North Yarmouth necessarily, but overall, and this is where the CDC uses their transmission data, is through the county, is substantial right now in our county. Consultation with local health professionals. We are setting up a new COVID advisory group that will be local, and I'll talk about that in just a moment as a recommendation to the board this evening. But I have been in consultation with 3 other health professionals outside the district over the last 2 weeks, especially considering all the new information. COVID cases associated with MSAD 51. We have no active COVID cases, obviously, because we're not in school at this time. We had, I believe, 105, a little more than 105 last year. COVID-related quarantines, again, that will be something that we'll be posting on our website again this year when those cases present themselves. Staff vaccination rates, currently, based on the information we have today, 70% of our staff in our district are fully vaccinated. We think that number is low because we have not yet inputted the new staff to our district into that number. So it's likely larger than 70%. We'll have more accurate information as the school year begins, and we'll be posting that information. Actually, the Department of Education now requires that each district submit their vaccination rates for all staff members, and that is submitted as a number and a percentage, not names. Student vaccination rates, we are going to start collecting voluntarily, obviously. Student vaccination rates, we do have data from June, but it has not been updated. The state also is very close to giving us a data tracker that any member of the public in the state can go to, look up a district, look up a zip code, and be able to see what the student vaccination rate is for any eligible students. Currently, we don't have that updated information, and I expect that we'll have it within the next 2 weeks so that we can check that information for our own district. And finally, the last metric we're looking at right now is pooled testing data, and that is if the board approves it tonight, and that is if parents choose to opt in. It's a choice, obviously, and it's voluntary consent. So the adjustments tonight are, these are the large adjustments. If you look at the full plan that was shared, and which will be edited and available to the public tomorrow night, or tomorrow, based on what the board does tonight. These are the major ones, not all the finer details, but looking at a layered prevention strategy to keep students in school 5 days a week, reduce quarantines, reduce contact tracing, and keep our kids in school. The recommendation on face masking, revisiting pooled testing, reorganizing the health team, COVID case reporting, and a fluid and continuous review. So looking at the in-person learning and keeping kids in school 5 days a week, maximizing in-person learning is what the CDC refers to as a layered prevention strategy. And it just means that there's a lot of different strategies. There's not just one strategy that districts are using. We've used a lot of these in the past, but we're adding some this year as long as the board goes along with it tonight. And this is, again, to reduce quarantine, school closures, and certainly to keep us out of the red. And as most people know, we are not looking at using the hybrid model at all this year. I don't see any reason why we would need to use that model or have that in place for any reason. So looking at layered prevention, again, helps us stay in school. The State Department of Education just sent this out on Thursday of last week. These are greater incentives for making sure that our students do not have to be contact traced and quarantined in the event of positive cases. So this is actually brand new information that came out. We've been waiting for this for at least 2 or 3 weeks. Fully vaccinated people who are asymptomatic do not have to quarantine when exposed to a positive COVID case. And that would include any of our students and staff members in our district. If there is a positive case in a classroom and they are fully vaccinated, they will not have to quarantine. Close contacts, staff or students who have a previous positive COVID-19 test collected within 90 days of the exposure do not need to be contact traced or quarantined this year. Any student or staff member who participates in weekly pooled testing is exempt from quarantine if exposed to COVID at school and they're asymptomatic. And then the last one is asymptomatic students who attend school where there is mask wearing, which is consistently used and enforced, and who are at least 3 feet away from the individual who tested positive in a classroom do not have to quarantine from the school day. And again, it's or, all these are or, you don't have to have all of them. So there's multiple ways for us to reduce now quarantining, contact tracing, and to keep our kids in school. So I think this was a welcome development from the state that was put out late last week. So again, looking at the preventative layers, and what I'm recommending this evening, obviously, is to continue using what we did last year, asking families to please use the self-screening tool before their children leave their house. Just make sure that they're feeling well enough to go to school and don't have symptoms, and if they do, to stay home. Consistent and correct mask use while in school with a formal review no later than October 18th, an ongoing review at each board meeting with an update on the metrics, the status of recommendations from the CDC, Department of Ed, and making sure that this conversation is a continuous one. Physical distancing, only when feasible and when it does not detract from the educational program. The CDC recommends it, but does not strongly recommend it, basically. At this point, I think the point is, and we heard some comments and I agree with them wholeheartedly, we do not want another year where students are unable to interact, not having collaborative working in cooperative learning groups, being able to get near their teachers. I think that was a thing we heard a lot from. Even our staff, is the proximity of staff being able to work with students in close proximity. They missed that, and it was very isolating for students and for our staff, and that certainly does not add to the educational program, and we want to make sure that we're not pushing that unless there's options where distancing just makes sense in that moment. Screening, testing to promptly identify cases. This is a proactive measure. We didn't have enough parents that were interested in pooled testing in the spring. I'm asking the board tonight if we can go ahead and ask parents again. Again, it's an opt-in. It is a consent-driven procedure where parents have to give their consent for their child to participate. But it would be proactive in being able to look at a pool of students. If there is a negative test, which in most cases there would be from that pool, then everything's good. If there's a positive case, there's a secondary test that's done called a BINEX test, which we have already opted into. And that BINEX test would help identify whichever student is positive and then try to mitigate the close contacts that are occurring so that we're reducing quarantining. Continuing with cleaning, sanitation, ventilation, as we did last year, pushing hand washing as we did last year, contact tracing, but using the new incentives I just mentioned in the last slide. BINEX Now testing is very important. That is if a child is sick at school or not feeling well, has symptoms, sent down to the nurse by a staff member or goes to the nurse on their own. The nurse can then, with parent consent, test the student in the office and get results within an hour at the school and be able to give the parent those results. I think this is very important. That first of all, if it's, hopefully most of the time it's not a COVID test, parents don't have to take their child to get a test, and they don't have to quarantine for 10 days. They can come back with a negative test as soon as they're feeling better, just like they would for any other reason. And finally, the other preventive strategy is obviously vaccination, and that's obviously a parent choice, a family choice. But we are required to report now numbers and percentages of our own staff members in our district starting in September on a monthly basis. So talking about face coverings, and I'll just make a ad-lib comment for a minute. I think all of us were ready for the face mask to go. I know I was. We've had a couple months of not having to wear them for the most part. In Maine, I think we're excited about it, hoping to get back to a regular school year, and at the end of July to kind of get the news that things have shifted. And it's been one shift after another with COVID since March of 2020. I think, I'm in the same spot as a lot of people. I did not want to recommend face masking tonight. I would say 2.5 weeks ago, I was at a place where I was not prepared to do that. However, 2.5 weeks in a land of COVID means a lot, and you also have to consider the role that a school district does have in making sure that all of our students and staff are safe in our schools. And I know that's an argument that can be weighed on both sides, and we have to make a decision about what that means. In the end, for me, it was the public health authorities that we have to listen to in a public school system and do the best that we can. It is not something that I want students and staff to have to do all year. And I know that that's not something I can say definitively right now, but it is my absolute hope that we are not in face masks for very long this school year. I am already, and I know a lot of staff are already worried that the first few weeks of school, which are so critical in setting the parameters for school and welcoming students back in, are already going to be somewhat compromised by people wearing masks. But it is something that, when you weigh the costs and the benefits, for me at this point, it does not make sense not to recommend this. Again, keeping students in school 5 days a week is the goal, and that is part of the mitigation for doing this. There's already a requirement, this is a requirement, not a recommendation from the federal CDC that had to be adopted by the Maine CDC, that masking occurs on buses. However, there's no distance requirement on buses. Students can ride the bus as they have in the past. This would be a typical ride. We're not asking parents this year to go out of their way to drive their children to and from. We certainly encourage it if parents feel more comfortable with it, but it's not necessary. We can accommodate children on our buses, given that distancing is not required on those buses. And again, the removal of the requirement of face masks could be done by the district all at once or by the school, depending on conditions. I think there's a strong argument to be made that the high school, once we have vaccination numbers and some more guidance from the state, and I was on a call this morning with the Commissioner of Education, who actually said just that. She said maybe, high schools could be the first to go. And the state is considering a metric to help guide us on that. The state of Vermont just, I think it was late last week, gave a metric or put out a metric to school districts in the state of Vermont that an 80% marker with students and staff being fully vaccinated would be their marker in the state of Vermont for a school not to have to mask universally anymore. It could be optional. So I think that the state is looking at that very seriously. The superintendents that were on the call, including myself, were very interested in that particular kind of metric as a guide for us. I think those are the things we're looking for. Pooled testing. I know pooled testing is controversial, and again, it is family choice as to whether or not a child is participating. I think the district did not put out enough information, and I'll buy that and own that in the spring, and we're planning to put out more information. I have a meeting with the school nurses tomorrow, as well as Julie Olson, Director of Instructional Support. One of the things we'll be talking with the nurses about is making sure we get all the information we can about pool testing out. I'm only recommending that we start pool testing in our district for grades pre-K to 8, again, for the same reason that we're looking at vaccination rates. The more children and staff that are vaccinated in a school, the less need for pool testing, and I think the less buy-in that you would have for pool testing. So at this point, I'm not recommending that the high school move forward with it. That could change down the road if the board tonight decides that they'd like to try it across the grades. We can look at that again. Pool testing, we'll have more information and resources we'll be sending out to parents hopefully tomorrow, but if not tomorrow, later this week. There'll be an opt-in form for parents, very convenient. If they choose to do it, they can just quickly fill out a very brief form. She'll only take a minute or two to fill it out, and then we have it on file. Parents can also change their mind if they choose to have their child opt in, or again, if they want them to opt out at a later date. But we'd like to get a good read on parents who are interested in doing this. So the advisory team, we had a health team last year. The health team did a lot of work. They met every single week. I want to thank the health team for all of the minutia that was decided last year. Some of them were not popular decisions that the group had to make, but they were based on the information that we had at the time. This year, I'm recommending to the board that we go with a different model, which is an advisory team that opens it up a little bit more externally in the community. We still have district staff on there, but we also open it up to external medical professionals. We have a parent on there. We have a board member on there and have other folks that are participating in this process. I originally had a student on there as well, kind of gone back and forth about the student piece. There might be times when we are discussing something that could be confidential or not confidential, but I think in the realm of staff-related COVID stuff that would not be specific to a staff member, but kind of weighed whether or not it was appropriate to have a student on there. I still think that having a student on there would be valuable, and I think if the board is okay with it, we decide to add a student at a later time if that would be something that they would find acceptable. COVID case reporting, we got some feedback that people were a little bit tired, and I can understand. I was tired of writing those letters. We had 105 or a little bit more than that last year. We're not going to do the same process this year. When we have a positive case that we're required to report, that's a state requirement, we will be reporting those out only in our weekly newsletters, which come out on Thursdays. So it'll just be a standard part of our weekly newsletter where we'll include, much like the information we provided last year, but just on a summary basis for the week, each week. The other thing is that in real time, we will add it to the COVID Information Center dashboard, which will continue this year. So if people wanted to see a case, what's the case reporting look like today or yesterday or tomorrow, they can certainly go on at any time and look at the most updated. We'll update that as soon as we have a case that we know of. But in terms of sending or pushing out information this year, we're not going to be pushing out those almost daily letters that we did at least last year. Hopefully we won't have that level of notices anyway this year. And then again, I've mentioned this, but I'm recommending to the board that this become a regular board agenda update for each board meeting going forward from tonight, and that there is a first formal report. Who knows, it might be the last, I'm not sure, but at least a formal report due on October 18th, and that the recommended superintendent's advisory group weigh in, hopefully more than once before then, but it's certainly weighing in on what should be recommended to the board for the adjustments that I've talked about tonight. We'll have a frequently asked questions FAQ document. I actually believe we'll have it ready to go out tomorrow based on whatever the board decides tonight. We've been working on questions that parents have been asking through email. Board members have put forward that they've heard from parents, questions that we feel like parents will want to know the answers to that may not be in any other material that we're sending out. And principals will also be sending out their own version of an FAQ with information about what it looks like in each school as well. So a day in the life, I had talked about this back in June. It looked a little different. I think some of the things, of course, haven't changed. Is we're here 5 days full-time, more typically this year. Health screening at home, that's the same as June. Same as June, dropped off by a parent driving or riding the bus. Again, we're not asking parents to do any of the above, whatever makes sense for their transportation. Students, obviously, we have a lot of students who drive themselves. Face coverings, this is the one that's changed, worn except for snack, lunch, and outdoors. We're encouraging our staff to go outdoors. We had a lot of teachers take their children out, or students out, I should say, during the fall weeks last year, especially during the first 2 months, and certainly the last 2 months. I think winter in Maine is fine, but there's probably algebra lessons that are better handled inside, I know, and that does detract from going outdoors for certain things, but certainly encouraging our staff to take kids outside as much as possible. There will be schools. We've been talking about this internally as an administrative team. Each school will decide on what lunch in the cafeteria looks like There are schools right now, especially at the older grades, that where the students will be in the cafeteria, eating in the cafeteria, whether in shifts or having all students in the cafeteria. We asked the Maine CDC for advice on cafeteria eating, and we're told that as long as it's a short period of time, that students can be unmasked and try to distance as much as possible. We're going to keep that certainly in mind. None of these things have been completely decided. We're still working on logistics. Mr. Poulin is working with the food service department on that as well. I think at the younger grades, we're trying to have students eat in smaller groups for a variety of reasons. We actually found it worked better for students not to be eating in a room with 200 plus students in there, that it was hard for kids to do that. So again, no final decisions, but that's kind of where we're leaning. Outdoor learning, strongly encouraged and supported by the district. A lot of the tents are going back up, the picnic tables are going back out. We have benches that have been put out. We have the amphitheater. We're encouraging, we also have the, what do you call that nice park structure? You have a name?
Well, we kind of call it the pergola.
The pergola. And that has actually been used during the summer as well by the rec department for meetings, et cetera. It's a great space for classrooms to be out there. Field trips and special programs may resume. In fact, we have several already will be resuming. We have them planned out for September, though we're pulling back on exactly what those look like. So obviously, we're working with whatever restrictions the field trips are asking us to work with. But we are planning to continue looking at field trips, special programs, assemblies. We think those are an important part of the educational program. We just have to think about them differently. So last year, we took them off the table. This year, we're putting them back on the table and saying we just need to be more thoughtful in terms of how we manage those events. And then obviously, if students are feeling sick or symptomatic at school, we now have a measure of being able to find out if it's COVID or not and being able to give parents that very quick results so they don't have to worry about doing that, and then the student can return as they would once they feel better. And finally, this is the summary: resuming full-time in person, continuing to follow the guidance of our public health authorities, adopting a layered prevention model to keep kids in school, face coverings required indoors for all students and staff to begin the year, and I want to phrase that, to begin the year. Ask parents again about pool testing for pre-K to 8, using metrics to continually update the district status, and updating the board at every meeting going forward as to where we're at, and giving, obviously, the board a chance to ask questions, and if they choose to take action, that's up to them, but certainly keeping them informed as much as possible, because we do not, I don't see it, and I know board members don't see it this way as well, that we want this to just be, here it is, we're doing this for months or a year. This has got to be every 2 weeks, as board meetings are. We're making sure that we're out in front of that. And if something huge changes, certainly let you know in the interim. But those are the recommendations tonight from me to the board to consider as you discuss this.
Thank you, Jeff. What I'd like to do is move on to the items for action, and then we will maybe just take a couple minutes to think, and then we can discuss in between the vote, or between the motion and the vote.
Tyler, can you say that again? I can't hear.
Sorry, okay. I'd like to keep our discussion between the motion and the vote. So we're going to just keep our questions and anything that we want to ask Jeff to when we go to the vote. So moving on into items for action, we have vote to approve hiring of professional positions. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. And I just have a quick question, Jeff. There is one new position that is not certified by the Maine DOE, and I was curious, it says it's pending. I'm curious if that is confirmed before they actually start. I'm just curious. I never usually see
Yeah,
that on there.
we have that pop up from time to time, and it's because the Department of Education, the certification office, the busiest time they have is right now. They're processing literally hundreds of certifications, especially new certifications or anyone that's moved to Maine or whatnot. So it's in the queue. We check that daily for certification. As long as it's pending and the state is not giving us a red flag, we can start someone. When we can't start someone is when they don't have fingerprinting or a background check that's been completed. We cannot start someone. So those are things that obviously would hold it up. Certification, as long as the state is saying we don't think, and we usually will get some sort of a opinion from the certification office, even if they haven't completed their review, they'll say, we don't think there's an issue or whatnot, and we can check on that before the person starts. Obviously, the law says all of our staff have to be either certified or authorized if they hold those positions in our district, which is the vast majority of our staff. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they are certified and authorized. But we have people that, you know, for whatever reason, they're moving here, and it just takes time, and the department is backed up.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions before we vote?
Yeah.
Mike and then Kevin.
So, do you want to go first?
No, please.
Okay. Yeah. Save the intelligent question for last. Right. Just a quick question on the 0.1 FTE music teacher. Just interested, that's a small amount. So interested if you give any more context to that.
So that's, we had some adjustments that we made in music and in art, and we did it piecemeal, depending on where we could find the help. So those positions were advertised. We didn't know if we would get anyone that was interested. The person that you are voting on tonight for the 0.1 music teacher is a staff member for us already works as an ed tech in our district, and surprisingly, we've had this happen, I think, 3 times now in the last year. Also is state certified as a teacher in this particular area, which is bizarre. Same thing with art. We had the same situation come up, and was very interested in staying as an ed tech, but wanted to take on a little bit of teaching duties and is certified to do so. So it really worked out when we have our own staff members that we can hire to do these 0.1s or 0.2s, which you've seen some of these come across. And that's because of, first of all, enrollment's going up, but secondly, we added 10 teachers to our district, many of them at the elementary level. So we have to add allied arts, music, art. PE we were okay with from the beginning. We did some reshuffling of our staff, but with art and music we were left short in both areas, and we had to do some hiring.
Great, thank you.
Kevin?
My question was directionally similar, except these are obviously very fine candidates. It's great to read their background. And what I would ask is, because nobody in the community would probably be reading the background of folks, if there's anything that you want to talk about them and the roles that they're filling, I think that would be helpful for context.
Yeah, I mean, we have, oops, I think I'm off. We have a vacancy. Are you asking me about the actual positions?
Yeah, or anything notable about any of the candidates.
Yes, we have, I think I'm off, Kevin. We have a pre-K teacher position, a vacancy. This program has been in place for 2 or 3 years in our district. And this was just a staff change, a teacher change in that program from, that went to a different district for personal reasons. But we're really excited to be able to hire somebody who has experience as a pre-K educator as well. And that's been the case in both times that we've made that hire. And same thing with, we have an elementary math specialist. The opening resulted from the person that was in that position going to a classroom teaching position at 4th and 5th grade. So that person just moved to another position in our district, and then we searched for a new specialist. We have been finding amazing candidates for teacher positions, specialist positions this summer, including all of the additional 10 positions that we filled just for 1 year. So I was very surprised at the level of candidates, even for 1-year positions. Same thing, we have a grade 3 1-year position. This is now the last 1-year position that we are filling. We did some moving around, and that should be the last one that you'll see. And then again, you mentioned the 0.1 music teacher, and again, that's an allied arts kind of an overrun that we need to make sure that we're covering for classes. We've had to adjust some of our allied arts offerings in terms of our scheduling. So we actually increased minutes in one school, and we had to decrease minutes in a different school, but it did actually, was probably more equitable at the end of the day in terms of how many minutes kids are getting for allied arts in a given week. And then we had a counselor opening at Greeley High School, and we were able to find an experienced counselor from another school, and that tends to be the case in our district. We usually find teachers who have experience somewhere else and are interested in coming to our district. So this was a late summer hire. Those are always tricky, and we're really excited that last week we were able to get an outstanding applicant processed for starting at Greeley High School in just a few days.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask that question because, again, we all had the luxury of being able to take a look at this, but to talk about the impact that we'll have immediately on school this fall, I mean, in a critical year this year, so thank you for doing that.
These are all critical positions that we need.
Thank you, Jeff and Kevin. Does anyone else have any questions before we vote? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. All right, and then moving back to the Greeley Goes Green plan adjustments, do I have a motion? And a second?
Second.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is...
Madam Chair, I'd like to move to divide the question, if possible, to first vote on the mandate of masks in grades 9 to 12, then in grades 7 to 8, and then in pre-K through 6, and then the remainder of the recommended changes, and that would require a second. And then if there was no objection, we could do 4 votes and move through the process and sort of separate the mask part from the rest of it.
Okay, is there a second for Jason's recommendation?
I wanted to mention something specific to what Mr. Porter presented and asking about the committee that he wanted to make about regarding students. I think that a student should be on that committee. I think it's really important that students be on that committee considering we're making the decisions for students.
We need to, I'm sorry, we need to act on the motion before.
Oh, I'm so
we can-
sorry.
Yep. Okay.
So do we have a second for Jason's
I second
recommendation? Okay. So Jason, can you present your recommendation again?
So dividing the question, I'd like to vote on the mask mandate for grades 9 through 12 as one thing, then grades 7 through 8 as another, then grades pre-K through 6 as another, and then the remainder of Jeff's recommendations as the last vote. So working through the process in that order, and however those votes end up, that would affect the last of the 4 votes, I would imagine. And I think it's appropriate to sort of walk through it in that order. So I appreciate the second. And if there's no objections, that in itself doesn't have to be voted on. We can just move through those.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or discussions before we move forward? I see lots of thinking going on. Okay, so since we have a second, we will look to the first recommended vote, which is voting on requiring masks. Is that what you were asking? Or not requiring?
Whichever way you want to word it.
Well, this is your recommendation, so I would appreciate your words.
Well, Jeff's recommendation is to mandate masks, so I would say let's leave the verbiage that way.
Okay, so we are looking for a vote for mandating masks for grades 9 through 12.
Can I ask a question? So okay, so this completely cleaves out. So if parts of these, this is confusing.
It is very confusing, I agree.
And also, it's a motion to then create 4 separate motions?
No.
Because there are 4 separate votes.
Yep, it divides the question, so you're voting on individual parts of it. So if we move through it in that process, because the logic to me is grades 9 through 12 are all at least age 12 and above, so their vaccination status, well, they could be vaccinated. So to me, logically, they're a different group, and we may not have to, in my opinion, impose the same sort of mandate on them. And then you could also just say the same about grades 7 through 8, who most of those kids would also be age 12 going in. Then the rest are going to fall into the category of aren't even eligible for vaccinations. Then based on how those fell, I thought it would be wise to have a greater discussion of the remaining parts of it, that maybe those votes would mess up the rest of it, essentially. But I think it's valid to sort of give special consideration, especially for the high school kids.
Sorry.
Mike and then Kevin.
Okay. I don't disagree with that point, that we absolutely should give thought to the differing nature of this virus, of the age of children. I am supportive of looking at it in a different manner. One, we don't have data yet on vaccination rates for the high school. So while yes, our high school students are eligible, we don't know what the percentage of them are yet. And that's an incredibly important point. So one, I would support the mandate of masks, just to be fully clear, for the whole of pre-K through 12 at this point. So I guess the reason why I'm probing here is because this is an important thing we just did. We just cleaved out this whole discussion where we walked into this and prepared to vote on something as a block, but now we're voting on it as 4 separate pieces. And so I just wanted to just clarify that. So right now we're currently, I guess we would be debating the mask mandate for 9 through 12.
I believe that we're debating whether or not to change the original motion. And so if we're voting that up or down, whether we're going, so Jason has made a motion and a second.
Okay.
And we must make a determination if we're going to, we're discussing that now, and we would vote whether we're going to make that decision. Now, if that's successful, then it would evolve into each of those 4 separate votes. And if it does not pass, it would sit as the original motion was proposed.
Your wise counsel is much appreciated, Mr. Desmond.
So we do have a second from Jennifer. Tom.
I don't believe that's accurate, I guess, if you're saying there is objections to splitting it up.
No, I'm saying that you made a motion to change that original as a block discussion.
It's not a change, it's just to divide.
But it is a change to what the agenda is.
So we're voting on whether we do that.
It's a motion within a motion. It's to divide the vote into various parts.
Right, and in order to do that, I believe that we must vote in order to accept that. And if that's the case, well, you can shake your head until tomorrow if you'd like, but I'm just sharing my opinion of what I believe you're asking. So
it would give the ability for some board members to potentially give a thumbs up to parts of it instead of thumbs down for all of it.
Okay, so what we were going to do is you've received a second from Jennifer, which would give us the ability to vote now on whether or not we're going to move forward with the 4-point recommendation that you have presented. So I'm now asking the board if, Tom.
And Tom had a
comment or question.
So
Thank you.
I agree, Jason. I think your point has merit that we shouldn't treat the high school kids the same way that we treat the Mabel I. Wilson kids in terms of our decision. But procedurally, wouldn't it be easier just for us to vote no for the plan as it's proposed and send it back with requesting changes that would reflect those differences?
I think that's less likely to happen. Sure. But I think it's more appropriate to break it up into the pieces that are more likely people think of in a different way. To me, the high school kids are different just because of possible vaccination status.
But without that data point, and unless everybody's going to fully disclose whether or not they've been vaccinated, the hope that people have been vaccinated is less relevant than the data.
And I do think that in 2 weeks, when we have committed to reevaluating, we might have a better idea of what that data looks like and also the metrics that follow.
Well, and that's an additional question, though, in terms of reevaluating. I did see and I've closed that. The date of October 18th, would that be the first review of the recommendation, or is it sooner than that?
So the first, it would be every board meeting would be an update, and the board can ask for a review sooner than October 18th, but no later than October 18th, a formal review. I will give a formal review to the board for consideration, and it may be nothing's changed, it may be I'm recommending X, Y, and Z change, or the board can ask for that review sooner.
So the board could request a review bi-monthly, twice a month, every 2 weeks?
If you wish to do that. It basically would be just a more formalized process for me to make a recommendation to the board for consideration.
Peter.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to getting the high school going as quickly as possible. And I think at this point in time, probably given everything, vaccination rates and such, the only group that's probably going to fall into that metric right now would be the high school. I think it's very problematic as far as 7th and 8th and kind of a non-starter for the rest of it. So I think as long as we can begin to get metrics really starting as soon as 2 weeks on this thing, I would probably vote no for this motion, but I will be howling like a little banshee every 2 weeks to make sure that we get this information to do it. And I appreciate what you're saying, Jason, because I'm with you in the fact that I think we need to get this high school going, but we need to kind of get information on vaccination rates and all this stuff. So I would say I'm emotionally in favor of this, but in practicality, just as long as the promised metrics are there and we don't dub around with it, I'd probably vote no on this.
Can I say something? I guess I would just like to say, I guess I'm kind of surprised by Jason's motion, but I had to second it in the fact that all through my notes in preparing to come tonight were why we didn't break it down, why we didn't look at the high school differently. I mean, my kids went forward and they got the vaccine thinking they could start school. Before I came tonight, I sat in the kitchen talking to my daughter, and she's like, so you're going to vote to put on a mask for us to go to school, but you're going to all sit on the stage shoulder to shoulder. It doesn't make sense. And we're not looking at it in our community. We can't compare it to Alabama. We can't compare it to even like other rural communities or other communities, even in Maine. Like, we are a community that set forth to get the vaccine and to really move forward. And for us to come to this meeting without those numbers and not to be prepared to talk on it, it's a shame on us. Like, we should have done more research in knowing where our student population has been vaccinated, what the accurate number is for our teachers and staff, and where that vaccination is. If we're riding on the vaccination to get us through this and we don't have those numbers, it's a shame. And earlier, preparing for this meeting last week, I asked for a medical professional to come talk. I was told by Jeff that no one would come and talk to us or the community because it's too political. And it just, I don't know what to say. It breaks my heart that we can't stand behind the people that we've consulted with and stand up here and get that advice, and people, we're not getting the right information. And for us to just not look at it independently as our own community and just do what everyone else is doing, it's a shame on us. That's my feeling. So we should be more prepared for this.
Yeah, I mean, can I just answer? I will say that the information for the students, I did try to get that information. The information was old as of June because we did our own clinics and we have our own data, and then we asked students. The issue is that when students get vaccinated somewhere else, which over the summer obviously they did, that information does not come to us unless we're directly asking students for that, and that's voluntary. They don't have to submit it. However, when a COVID vaccine is given to a student, my understanding is that data, not the student's name, goes to the state, and they have that data on how many students in a zip code or in a school district, if you look at your zip codes, are actually vaccinated. That information the state has said they are getting to us as soon as we can. I could have used the data that we have. It's totally inaccurate, I can tell you that much.
But we could have done a survey. We could have reached out to parents. I just think that parents would have given that information, whether it was anonymous or actually putting it beside their child's name, if it meant that we could have moved forward with this. So I know the board does not feel the way that I do. This really weighs heavy on me, and I really have. I understand for the kids that aren't vaccinated, if we, and I understand how detrimental this is. I have 3 kids that have missed out on school, but I just feel that we should have looked at it differently. And I tried to reach out, tried to have those conversations, I felt, and I get we all have different views and we're all coming from it differently. Parents have reached out to us also with their strong views on this, and I think the strong view is mostly in the elementary grades that we're getting that real push, and that's what we're seeing. We don't really get that big push from high school and middle level, so.
Tyler?
Both the students would like to speak.
Thank you. Madison and then Avery.
All righty. So I guess the first thing I wanted to mention, just with the specific grouping that you mentioned, I think that I like the idea of grouping the students as like age groups, because I agree that the high school should be treated differently than the middle school, and the middle school should probably be treated differently than the elementary school when it comes to masking, distance, stuff like that. But one thing that concerned me about the group listing is kindergarten through 6th grade. 4th, 5th, and 6th are all going to be still in the middle school. I think that it should be separated perhaps as, 6th, 7th, and 8th are one, or just 6th and then 7th and 8th, or kindergarten through 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th through 12th. I think that the grouping is just kind of odd just for the reasons of students are going to be with each other, especially the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, that if we were to make a different mandate for 4th, 5th, and 6th, but then the 7th and 8th, there's going to be a big discrepancy there. Teachers aren't going to be able to tell who's in what grade, especially if they're just wandering through the halls, unmasked, masked, whatever. So that was kind of a concern to me, but I do agree that the school should be treated differently. Is it okay if I bring up what I wanted to bring up earlier now?
I believe so.
Okay. So regarding the committee that you brought up, I think that a student should be on it, and I think that one way possibly around the problem of personal matters, confidential issues, stuff like that coming up is treating it like a student on the board. Like, we're not allowed to come to the executive sessions and then just kind of making the committee either make an agenda or just state, all personal and confidential things will be at the end and students will leave during that time, or the student will leave during that time. I think that would be a decent way around it to ensure that a student is actually on the board, because I think or on the committee, because I think it's really important that a kid actually be there that's going to experience everything, so.
Thank you, Madison. Avery?
Great. Yeah, so going back to sort of the groupings of the motion, I actually think it should be split up even more. One point I want to bring out is maybe voting on pre-K through 1st grade, because those are more of the developmental years of a child's life. And I think there's a aspect to wearing masks that may inhibit development in some way, or just maybe more beneficial and unnecessary for little kids. So.
Thank you. All right, so I'd like to get back to make sure that we stay on track with the votes and the motions that are in front of us. So right now we have a motion from Jason to split up the 9 through 12, 7 and 8, and then pre-K through 6. Jennifer has seconded it. do we have, so let's vote. All in favor? Okay. So seeing that we don't have majority, we will move back to the original motion.
Well, I would like to make a motion then that we vote on pre-K 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, 12.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? So we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4.
We count them, but they do.
Okay, so in this we have,
It's a separate division.
but in this we have majority or no?
Can people raise their hand again? I'm sorry.
We have Kevin and Jason and Jennifer.
That's not, actually, it's tied because we have 8 people tonight.
Oh, interesting. This is a really test to the Roberts rules tonight. So ties. Does it fail if it's tied?
I think it has to have a majority in order to pass.
Okay. So, so because we do not have a majority, therefore, that motion does not pass. So we would then move back again unless there is an additional motion. Okay. So I know that a lot of people have already shared, but now we are going back to the original recommendation, which includes.
Read the motion again.
Well, the motion is to approve the Greeley Goes Green plan adjustments as presented by the superintendent. So knowing that we are now talking about the larger grouping of recommendations that Jeff presented to us during presentations, I open up for discussion.
So at this point, we can further talk?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a few things. On the Greeley, the COVID advisory team, I think that it should have more than one parent on it, considering a parent of a high schooler is much different than a parent of a first grader. So I'm not sure if we're going to involve parents in this advisory group. I feel like there should be more than, it should be a parent in each building or something like that. I really do not understand when we say that the kids can eat lunch for 25 minutes en masse, sitting beside each other, why they can't sit in algebra class en masse. I know we've already kind of talked about that, but it really blows my mind. So, and I would think that, I'll leave it at that. When we say that Vermont has passed these metrics, and I did some reading on this, I would think that we as our own district could make our own metrics, and we could do that now. We don't have to wait for the state of Maine to give us those metrics. We could sit around and say, is 75% vaccination rates good with students and with teachers? And we're happy at that? Or 80% like Vermont? I just don't know, waiting to get those metrics, how we're going to get to move forward. Like how, Jeff, are you going to be tasked with saying, oh, this feels like we're getting better? And, 2 weeks from now.
I think, no, go ahead.
I'm just saying that I would think that we all would be more comfortable when we have benchmarks that we can hit and we can see that the data in our small community is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we all can get comfortable and stand behind it and not looking at Cumberland County, state of Maine, New England, that way. And as we saw last year, the year before, waiting for the state of Maine to give us direction left our own district kind of chasing its tail in a few places and made us look bad and we left our students kind of sitting there wondering. I think that we need to be the leaders in this.
So just to answer, I think that's a good point, Jennifer. In the metrics, in the plan, it does leave it open-ended that the staff and student vaccination rates. I mentioned the state metrics because I heard that this morning for the first time, that they were considering it, and maybe that would be a good metric to use. But it is up to our district, according to the plan that's being recommended, that those metrics are based on our district. So that's information. If we find out we have 80% of our staff and students, which it's very possible at Greeley High School, that's what we're going to find out. I may be coming to the board and recommending that we're not masking at the high school, or we're even doing other things. I'm not sure.
But I think we need to know before, because I think there's always going to be the person that wants 95%, wants 100%. I think before we know the numbers, we need to know where we feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I think the metrics right now are open-ended, and it's also based on, checking with the advisory group, et cetera. The board certainly has a purview tonight to set a benchmark if you don't want to keep it open-ended right now. If you want a hard and fast metric, that's within the board's, authority to do that tonight.
I guess someone else can go.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. It's okay, I'll probably just go down the line. So Tom, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Sure. So I'll build on that. I'm really interested in the metrics as well, and I haven't had a chance to look at what Vermont has done yet, but I completely agree with Jennifer that we have an opportunity here to be proactive and not reactive. The October 18th date kind of terrifies me. That seems like a really long time from now, and I'm glad that we will continually review this, and hopefully we can make some progress well before then. Regarding setting the metrics, like Jeff, you were just saying, I'm hoping that would be something that the advisory group could do. How soon do you expect to be able to convene that group?
Within 2 weeks. I'd like to get the doors open.
Okay. I'm a little scattered here. So I wanted to highlight a few of the things that I've heard from the community comments tonight. And Jennifer, I think you touched on this. Leanne Candora left, but I completely agreed with what she had to say about setting targets and goals. The way that this is set out right now, it is really open-ended, and I think that didn't really serve us well last year, that we were able to just keep kicking the can down the road, and having some of those firm goals in mind, I think would serve us well. Hannah Barry, you're still here. I really love what you had to say. The thought of having our kids in masks all day, every day, it is not ideal. I want us all to be safe and for us not to have to go into quarantines and to be able to maintain 5 days a week of learning. But let's continue to prioritize the mental health of our kids. And we have a window here where it's not freezing cold and we can get our kids outside and out of their masks. And Jeff, you touched on this in your review of what a typical day could look like, but I'm hoping that we can maximize that outdoor time so we can break up the students' mask time. Let's see. Jeff, I have a question for you about the advisory team. You have the district physician on there and then 2 external medical professionals. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about the difference of those in those roles?
Yeah, the district physician obviously is a MD as well, and the person that we have in that role is an MD. But these would be searching our community, just our community here, Cumberland, North Yarmouth, for people who are also MDs who could serve as more voices from the medical community. So these will be medical professionals on the group. I think one of the things that I heard last year, and I think the board heard, is that we need more medical advice or people who are medical professionals advising the work of the district during COVID. Obviously, I think we thought we were phasing out all of the need for this, but we obviously aren't. I think it's probably more important than ever that we make sure that we have a group in place that can continuously look at metrics and then be advising as to what the recommendations should be going forward on a continuous basis.
Okay. And then, let's see, I had one other question, a bigger question, but I'm struggling to come up with it right now. But so my smaller question is there a rationale for why there's no social distancing on buses?
There's no rationale, but that is where it's left. And it doesn't say we can't distance on buses. We ran into a huge problem last year with just half of the students in, with parents dropping and picking their kids up, and it was as much as we tried to not make it a bottleneck situation, it was, especially at the elementary level. But I think there's no rhyme or reason for the buses, except that they want all kids transported that need to be transported. We don't want to put kids in a situation where they can't ride the bus and get to school. When we, I think it's the same with the distancing in the classroom. The CDC is now recommending, well, they're recommending it, but they're saying it shouldn't hold you up. Same thing with a bus. If you can distance, great, but if you can't, then the mask is really the next best thing. Make sure you're masking. The CDC will say, have multiple things in place at one time, but don't let it get in the way of doing something that you need to do. We asked parents, and they stepped up in a huge way last year. We can't keep asking parents to do that. We're being told now you can put students on a bus next to each other with masks on, and that is considered safe, at least as safe as we've been told it is. So we're going with that guidance. We're going to transport kids. Now, we do have windows open on the buses, at least during the fall months. In the winter, it gets trickier. We did have to do that last year. It gets cold. You have to crank the heat, too. But, Scott, do you want to add anything?
I was actually wondering if I could add something to that. Because I think my feeling on that is that the buses, the reason it's like that is because that's a requirement for all public transportation. So it's not so much that the school bus is a unique situation. It's more that the school bus is a form of public transportation. So if you take Concord Court down to Boston, you're not going to socially distance. They don't have up any dividers. Yeah. They just ask you that you wear a mask. So.
Yeah, there's that as well. There's also on the bus, as Jeff mentioned, the front and the rear windows are open on the bus, which creates a flow of cross ventilation through the bus, which also helps in that situation.
Thank you. So, and I remembered my my last question. I'm sorry, this is hopefully it's not too detailed for you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the process of tracking student vaccination and calculating those rates. You had mentioned, I think, something about it going to the state and then making calculations based on population estimates. And I've been looking at the CDC's vaccination rate by zip code data, and which gave me real pause. I found myself pretty skeptical about it. I mean, not only because it's a 99% rate for our communities, but also the fact that what little I could find about the methodology was that they're using 2018 population counts, and they didn't provide any specificity about the ages that were included. I think it just said all ages, which we know is not the case. So maybe it's all eligible ages, but still, some 99% seemed pretty high, and they weren't particularly transparent about their methodology. What plans do you have for collecting evidence of vaccines, whether self-reports are enough or whether you need an actual vaccine card? And then how do we calculate that denominator?
So we have not asked for vaccine cards. We've asked voluntarily for students and staff. Starting last year, we started asking for people to give us that information. When we had the student clinics, we also just had that information available here. But most of our students obviously didn't get vaccinated at one of our clinics here. They did that on their own. So that's where the information is not accurate. That same tracker I went on, and one day it was 99%, the next day, I think 2-3 days later, it was 95%. So they had dropped it. I don't think that the state has gotten accurate data yet in order to populate. Obviously, it shows it's lower rates as you get farther out from Portland. It's in the 70%, 65%. Our district is in the 90-something% right now, and looking at that tracking metric. But what we've been told is the state is still working on it, and they're still adjusting that data. I think we can get our information from our students once they return and we get a full accounting of students who are voluntarily giving that information to us. We could start with the high school and do that. The information we had at the high school was pretty low when I asked for it. And it was based on June's data. It wasn't based on anything over the summer. So the same thing with the staff. We're required to report the staff. But again, a staff member, it's up to them to tell us. And we're not saying, give us your vaccination card. We're asking, can you just tell us, are you vaccinated or not? And that's completely on them to tell us whether they are or not. So it's pretty much voluntary at this point. I think the student data will be more accurate once the state gets their metric done, because they can draw on the clinics across the area and look at where students are coming from and be able to give it to us by zip code better than we can do it. And that's why I feel like that's worth the wait.
Okay, so that you'll provide enrollment data and they'll match that to
They already have that information.
Okay.
Or they do it by zip, so you can look at both zip codes, Cumberland, North Yarmouth, see what the eligible, their students, obviously in an age range, they're going to break it down by age, is what they've told us, and that you can look at the students who are eligible in that age, which is 12 to 18 right now, and say, what is the percentage of students in your zip code for Cumberland and North Yarmouth, and put those together and be able to come up with a vaccination rate. That's the thinking behind this, and we're told it will be very soon. Yeah, what that means. But I think to Jennifer's point, we don't have to wait either. School starting, that's one thing that we could be asking our families to provide now as we're coming back.
And Jeff, you alluded that you, in the spring, asked students for that information. How was that done?
Nurses kind of collect students over time.
I wouldn't, me as a parent, it should be asked of the student whether they're vaccinated. It should be asked of the parent whether they're vaccinated.
Yeah, I don't know how they fix it. I mean,
I feel like it's a parent's,
right,
not a student's discussion.
Right.
On that information.
Yeah, that's very key.
Right, of course. And I guess one other note is in the high school, these kids aren't going outside to get mask breaks, so they're spending all of their day inside with very little time to take off their mask. So I'm not sure how the high school for 5 days is going to incorporate more time for them, and whether that's how that will work, but maybe there's certain classes they can spread out and take them off. Or these kids, it's long, vigorous, really hard classes these kids are taking, and they are exhausted when they come home.
I know.
Something has to, so.
I know, and I think that
We have to rework even this
Right.
going to green plan.
And this has to be fluid. That's the most
But it has to be
important thing.
done now. We start school in 2 weeks. These kids are going to take advanced biology, boom, right at day one. Like, it's a big deal. And these kids take it very serious. They're in high school to go to college, this is their path. This is very important to them.
I think we were weighing that against, I will say that many of my colleagues in meetings 2 weeks ago were thinking about high school as a separate entity and grouping as well as you are tonight. And, we just kept coming back to the CDC as saying, no, do everybody right now to begin. Don't start that way. Start with everybody a mask and go from there. And the department was saying that. We weighed it. I'm telling you, it's been back and forth in my head too. But I think this, from my perspective, it's better to start and then remove that requirement than to go the other way.
Okay. So, all right, we're at me, and I'm just going to go. So I just I do have a statement from Vanessa, who is not able to be here tonight, but she did pass along some of her thoughts, even though she is not voting. Before I read that, though, I did want to say a couple small things. I was just looking at our enrollment, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott and Jeff, but over half of our students are under the age of 12. Is that correct?
Yep, that would be about
Okay.
7th grade, yes.
So that alone says a lot to me about how are we making sure that we are keeping everybody in our school safe, knowing that most of those younger students also have siblings that are probably in the high school. And again, as we just discussed, we do not have the data that supports making a decision to remove masks from that high school level quite yet. I also wanted to say that I'd like to change the conversation around fear associated with masks to empathy and compassion. We all have heard that wearing a mask is to help protect the people in front of us, and I think if we could change the narrative around that as a community, it would be really helpful and provide a really great lesson to all of our students and staff. And if there's one thing that I heard a lot last year, it was that we need to be in school 5 days a week. And if this is something, and I know we're just talking about masks, and there are a lot of other things that went into this, but obviously the mask is a really hard decision to make. And if we are committed to making sure that our kids are in school 5 days a week, starting the year with masks across the board, in my opinion, is the right choice. When Jeff brought this recommendation up to me and we discussed a couple of different things, you know, just trying to figure out, because the information changes so much, I was really adamant about making sure that we look at this at every board meeting because everything changes so much. And so, although there is a date on the presentation of October 18th, I think that was a placeholder. And I think it's important to remind everyone that every time we sit at these tables, the priority is making sure that our kids are healthy and safe. And we are going to be reviewing anything that has come up since the last time we were sitting at this table. So I want everyone to remember that whatever decision we make tonight is for the next 2 weeks, and that nothing is permanent. And we learned that in a very hard way the past year. So I don't want to leave tonight thinking that we've made a vote and nothing's going to change, and this is, you know, I just want to remind everyone that we'll be back here in 2 weeks again. So I'm guessing you could probably assume that I am supportive of starting the year in masks. So I'd like to read Vanessa's statement, and then we can move down the table. So Vanessa shared that, I first want to thank all parents that reached out to the school board and shared your stories, thoughts, and concerns. For the school year 2021-22, the most important goal we should have as a community and board is to keep our children in school full-time 5 days a week. Children thrive in a learning environment that is consistent. When a child experiences the same routines over and over, the brain strengthens connections that will lead to trust and secure attachments. Children who live in consistent environments also learn to regulate their own emotions and behavior better because they know what to expect in the world around them. Over the past year, our children have had nothing short of an inconsistent learning environment and routine. I want for MSAD 51 to come together and form a consistent, united front with masks. I can't stand the thought of my youngest who has trouble with pronunciation and people understanding him while he is not wearing a mask. And masks makes it even worse. But I don't want the inconsistent learning environment my children and all the children of MSAD 51 were exposed to over the past year. I would like to encourage all parents to participate in the pooled testing and to come together to form a united front for the first 8 weeks to wear masks, and to the board to put on the agenda for September 20th to revisit the masking protocols for those that are vaccinated. I do believe in science, and I believe children, especially at the younger age, do not transmit like adolescents and adults. But I believe more in committing to our children to be in school for a full year, 5 days a week with no interruptions, and that the layered preventative strategies can help in preventing the interruptions of school. Whether you believe in masks or not, I do know that wearing masks last year alone reduced the cold, seasonal flu, and a number of other airborne illnesses. So thank you, Vanessa, for sending that along. We miss you this evening. Kevin.
Kind of nice being in the middle. You guys ask all the tough questions. So a few things. I think what Vanessa said in her document, as well as what other folks have said, you know, you always have that return to school spectacular cold season on the best of years. I think that we've all seen kids come down with that. A couple of questions for you, Jeff. The advisory team, how will they make their decisions?
So not decisions, but just recommendations to me. But basically it will be topical. So whatever, I think looking at the metrics and then any topic that's come up. The metrics have got to always be in front of them, looking at the data that we have available. Is there anything else that they can bring to the table if they have for data? And then if there's a topic that's important, for example, the masking would have been a perfect topic for this group. Had it been already in place, I would have liked it, so I had to pick other external providers to just, pick their brains a little bit. But that would be, I think that's really the point of that group, is to give the advice on what are we taking to the next board meeting.
But is that a majority rule then? If the majority of that group tells you or suggests to you or recommends to you something, do you follow that, or do you still have?
Not necessarily, but I would certainly report what the majority of the group has said, even if I don't take their advice in moving forward. Okay. But it's an advisory group, really, to me, to help in giving information to the board or recommending to the board on what we want to do.
The composition of the group, and I think that our highly skilled students bring up an excellent point, that there absolutely should be representation on that, and I don't think you look any further than these two folks,
right?
Because they're right for it, and you don't look like you have anything else going on. The other piece of it is, if you are looking at parents, I would make that suggestion. Not that you need an overwhelmingly larger group, but you should have one from North Yarmouth and one from Cumberland, so that both communities have somebody who is representing them as well. I don't know if that gets you upset, but this one might. Jennifer's point is spot on. This group should not be waiting until school opens, and I know that we're up against it now, but this group. The earliest convenience to put it together and get folks together, and I know that it's summer and people have things going on, but I don't want to look folks in the eye and say that we've got an advisory team that is going to be a reactionary team. I would like an advisory team in advance of the school starting, and that group would be perfect to work with you to come up with those metrics that make the most sense for this community. Again, Jennifer is spot on, saying that in the absence of great information from the state, who looks at the entirety of the state of Maine, and each of these counties are markedly different. Now, Cumberland County, obviously with the population, when I went to the CDC site that you cited on here, the numbers are big, but they don't represent necessarily the percentages of folks that are vaccinated in this community. So I think that this group can you do you a solid favor, but I implore you to see how quickly we can make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
You do spend time with the cohort groups, schools. What are they doing?
When you say cohort, what do you mean?
Falmouth?
Oh,
Cape?
okay.
Anybody, what is their opening plan?
Well, Yarmouth tonight is voting at this moment, probably, in Yarmouth next door, and I can't exactly tell you because every conversation is a little different depending on the day, but they were leaning exactly the way we're leaning tonight. Many of the recommendations are similar in masking all the way through high school at this time, just to start with clear, definitive timeline. That was the last conversation I had with the superintendent in Yarmouth. Falmouth, same thing. I think the high school piece was one that we had all debated countywide. We had talked about it. But most landed that we were going to start across the board pre-K to 12 as a recommendation. We all have kept each other informed. We have a spreadsheet where we've looked at each other's best thinking around recommendations and met with the commissioner multiple times and the CDC representative, director of the CDC, Maine School Management, county meetings. All those things have taken place in the last 2 weeks.
Thank you. And I guess lastly is, the divided vote. I always looked at this as, well, because of age. So Mabel, made sense to me. The middle school makes a lot of sense to me. In the high school, I really thought if you divided it 2 ways, I would have been much more comfortable. And as turns out, we didn't have the votes anyway. But that being said, a bifurcated plan, I think, makes a lot of sense. I think that, as some of my colleagues have said, if you were talking about vaccination rates and this gets socialized, and I'm sure this might show up on Facebook later, if folks had an understanding that if they are reporting, if they're voluntarily reporting that their kids have been vaccinated, I think that those markers that you're creating will be a lot easier to achieve and try to really move the conversation forward. So that's it.
Thank you, Kevin. Peter?
First, I agree with Kevin that we ought to have a parent from Cumberland and North Yarmouth on there. I think we do need the parents involved. I am in favor of both of the students on there. I think we totally need their perspective because they're the ones really on the ground on this thing. And I think the addition of the 2 community physicians will kind of be a balancing thing that should alleviate a lot of what's going around in the community, that we're adding more physicians to this group. So I think that makes sense. As I said to Jason, I was very, very tempted, and I don't know what by whatever it is means, but if it means that we split it between the high school and the thing, I might have, well, as I said, this Lewiston Auburn education sometimes is a little lacking. But anyway, I think I probably could have supported that, but I think following yours and Jennifer's thing on getting this thing up and running, and my good colleague here to the left says that we actually have a meeting on the 2nd of September. I don't think we're going to have enough at that point, but it's a good one to do the benchmark. So I think, given all those things, I mean, I've always thought, given the vaccination stuff and everything, that at least initially we had to do something with the K-8. I think one of the things that we want to be thinking ahead is that at some point, and we're told maybe it's December, maybe it's January, that they will authorize the vaccine for a younger group. I'm not sure what the thing is. And I was telling a member of the public the other day, and it'll probably age me, but there was another crisis in our country, medical crisis, back in the late 40s and 50s called polio. And when the Salk vaccine was developed in 1954, in Mrs. Doe's 4th grade class in Fairview School, we were lined up, put our little arms up, and Shirley Davis, the health officer, came in and inoculated everybody. The country was united, and a scourge that scared the living hell out of every mother in the United States was eliminated. Now, I know in this day and age, with all the political stuff, that we probably can't line them all up and vaccinate them, but I hope we can come up with some kind of a program in school where we can do that. And then maybe, Jason, that the metrics will be such for our 6 through 8, because I don't know much about ages of 6th graders, but I imagine a lot of them are below 12 years old. But if we can concentrate on getting that group, then there's probably a good chance that we can at some point get the middle school. But I think it's important that if we can run our own vaccination program, and I know we can't point a little gun at the kids and make them line up, but if we can come up with some kind of a plan on that. But I'll vote for the plan because that we're going to have enough updates so we can make changes to it.
Thank you, Peter. Mike?
Thanks. So I'll try to keep it brief because I I don't have any quibbles with anything folks have said, and I actually really appreciate what people have brought up. We should be treating kids differently. We should be looking at the high school differently. I just don't feel comfortable, don't have enough data yet to vote on that at this point. But I'm with Jennifer, and I appreciate her demanding to get the data as quickly as possible. I think we should strive to have as much information, enough information to make an informed decision on reevaluating, especially the high school, on September 2nd, if we can. I think that's, we should strive for that. And if we can't meet it, that's fine, but we should strive to see if we can reevaluate the high school by September 2nd when we're back here. I think that's fair. That data, hopefully we can get that, at least in terms of the vaccination data. Now, in terms of metrics for vaccination rates, I really would hope the state would get their act together and offer one quickly. But again, as mentioned before, the state has been slow on these things. We could do our own, but I don't particularly have the expertise to decide if it's 75 or 80 or 85. I mean, maybe the group can give a recommendation, and we should consider that. But I do like the idea of metrics, especially as Peter mentioned, once we get to the point when the FDA authorizes a full vaccine and we get to kids younger than 12, it'd be good to walk into that with a metric of saying, all right, once we get our 6th through 8th graders up past 80% or so, we can remove masks, that sort of thing. I do think the CDC is also evaluating this at the same time, Maine CDC as well, so continuing to listen to them, that's really important. Continuing on just with vaccinations, the vaccination rate you gave for staff was low.
Yeah, and it doesn't include our new staff. We have not we're still processing new staff right now. So that information we will have by the next board meeting.
I think the state just recently, in the last day or so, put out a mandate for health workers to get vaccinated. I hope the state does that for education workers, for all public workers. We do this for other vaccines. We should do the same for COVID. As a district, it would be hard doing it just ourselves. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I'm trying to make you feel better, Kevin, by saying that on Facebook. But it is a state decision, but the vaccine mandate would make sense from the state. And I think the district leadership team and as well as the association should really do a lot of work encouraging all staff to get vaccinated. The NEA supports a vaccine mandate. I would hope our association would too. A couple other quick things. I'm glad that we're reevaluating, considering pool testing, or putting it out to parents to consider pool testing. I think that's great. That could actually help us remove mask mandates sooner if we are continually getting data back that there's no instance of COVID, especially if case rates start dropping. If we look at Delta variant in other places around the world, the UK, it's starting to drop. Perhaps that's the case. That will be the case here, especially if the state people keep getting vaccinated. So, just a notion of appreciation for that. Two last things. First, the appreciation for including a strong recommendation for outdoor learning, outdoor breaks. Honestly, I would appreciate it being even stronger, basically saying to the district leadership team and teachers that it is mandated. Jennifer's right. High schoolers probably don't nearly get as much time, that it needs to be included in plans and now, and that teachers can, and especially for younger teachers, teachers of younger students, putting it in supply lists to parents now. And so we can incorporate that into plans for immediately as we start the school year and throughout the school year. So couldn't emphasize that enough. The last thing is just, I had a question on remote school. I'm not advocating for remote school, but if parents decide to do homeschooling, because we're not doing our remote school option this time, correct?
Right.
That's which I support. If parents decide to homeschool until a vaccination comes, is there an opportunity for them to be integrated in the school setting in the meantime?
There always is. We have actually a long history of integrating based on parent preference and us being able to work with a family around their homeschooling schedule. We have a lot of families that opt to have their children participate in like a special, like an allied arts, whatever grade it is. Or at the high school, we've had students that will take one class with us and are homeschooled the rest of the day. But it really depends on their comfort level with COVID and the masking and all that, whatever's going on in the school. Really, I couldn't tell you, what would happen this year. But generally speaking, we have a lot of our homeschool families that opt to do that, and so we include them in whatever we can work out with the family that makes sense for the school. They're usually back and forth, and they'll say we want to be part of the music class every week. Okay, we try to make sure that they are hooked in with a class that goes to music at the same time every week. We've done that a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Athletics, we've worked with students around athletics if they're homeschooled as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Jason?
I have some thoughts that I put down ahead of time because I don't do great off the cuff, and then some questions that have come up tonight for Jeff maybe can help. First, though, I wanted to mention, just thank everybody in the community and here. The level of respect tonight was fantastic, and I've watched some other meetings in other towns recently, and it didn't go that way. So kudos to everybody after such a hard year. I've read all the emails and appreciate everyone's concerns. On one side, I hear people wanting to be 100% safe, and this approach seems to be focused mostly on COVID case data. On the other hand, I hear people speaking of a small risk and certain assured damage to their kids with masks being worn or mandated. I've listened tonight, and I understand both sides. Board members here are in a lose-lose situation in, again, unprecedented times. As board members, I feel we represent the kids and are tasked with providing resources for all kids to be the best they can be. I understand all of these kids have teachers, parents, grandparents, and friends who have varying degrees of potentially greater risk. I am focused here on the kids, our students. I've tried hard to find compelling data to conclusively support one way or another on masks, and I cannot. So I have tried to reconcile the information and the misinformation with what simply seems to make sense to me and follows what I believe are logical and good priorities, and weighing the risk rewards for some versus many, or many versus some. Again, focused on the kids and data from the last weeks and 17 months. I'm frustrated that the updated MDOE standard operating procedures, where all of this comes from, is sort of forcing us down a path of mandating masks or pooled testing, both of which I have an issue with given the COVID data related to people under age 20 in Maine. I don't believe any child is a better learner and happier with a mask on. I do not believe that poor-fitting cloth masks that we all fidget with hundreds of times a day would help reduce the spread of these germs. I do, however, feel that rebreathing CO2 and wearing essentially a petri dish on your face could and does have adverse effects. I have concerns about young learners reading faces and learning sounds and proper mouth movement, not to mention facial expressions, a teacher's smile for one. I believe continuing to adversely affect our children's typical school experience has a much greater chance of impacting a greater number of children with long-term consequences than the very small chance of one of our students being hurt from COVID. My views may not be yours, and that's okay. I am not advocating against masks for your kids. I am advocating for you to make your own choice. People who want to be and feel protected can wear a mask. Those who don't have to. I can't condone our school overstepping our own state's current verbiage of simply recommending masks. We are no longer in a state of emergency, and I find it hard to understand how we are making rules stricter than our states. I am advocating for people to be able to make their own choice. Regardless of the outcome here tonight and our path forward, I would ask the community, let's not let this divide us. Let's not isolate students and put teachers in the middle of this. Questions for Jeff. If masks are mandated, what is the school going to do to provide an education for the children who are unable to wear a mask emotionally, psychologically, and other health reasons? I think this sort of goes along with what Mike said, but is there a distinction between people that would voluntarily homeschool and people that might have a defined medical condition? What is our obligation to them?
If Dr. Olson, do you mind talking about, because this directly impacts certain students in our district, we have students that are on plans, specifically IEP plans, 504 plans, and just, I think she can give you an idea of how we've handled this in the past.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Certainly students who require accommodations due to their medical, physical, or emotional well-being, we've had to make those accommodations, and we've done so by creating individual learning spaces. So students will have their own office at the high school level or their own space that's plexiglassed and secure if they're unable to wear a mask for a sustained period of time for the safety of other students. We have students who are working on mask wearing and systematically increasing their time, but some of that time is like 10 seconds at the moment, right, that they can sustain wearing a mask. So we have goals around that outlined in our individual education plans, and we're working on those skills and moving those forward. We do have an obligation to still educate those students, and so need to require that learning environment in a place that they can do that safely without impacting the safety of their peers around them. And then certainly have utilized a lot of our outdoor learning spaces for our populations of students who struggle with their masking so that they can have interactions and social opportunities with their peers outside.
So in general, if a child isn't on an IEP, they wouldn't sort of meet that bar for those sort of accommodations?
They wouldn't have a separate learning environment for those, right, because their least restrictive setting or their educational setting is their general ed classroom, so they would not. We do have 504 plans that outline students who are requiring different level of breaks on their masking that may be more prevalent or individual than a whole class taking a break at a certain time.
Okay. So I would second what many people have said here. You know, what is the end game if masks are mandated, and what metrics exactly are we going to go by? Just reinforce that. I'd say it is important to note that last year students were wearing masks 2 days a week, and now will be 5 days a week, and I sort of feel like that's going to amplify the mental toll on the kids. I'd point out that the rec program has run all summer, unmasked, with children, you know, very close to each other, and I haven't heard any issues with that. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but I was reading through the MDOE's standard operating procedures, and these are all guidance or recommendations, also not mandates. Is that correct?
Most of them are contact tracing. We have to follow the contact tracing, but yes, the rest are recommendations.
And in your presentation, point 4 of how to sort of avoid quarantines, like you just only had to meet one of those criteria. Am I reading it right that if we instituted and could generally enforce 3 feet everywhere, then that makes asymptomatic quarantines 0?
Technically, yes. I think in a particular case, yes. If there was a positive case, you could read it that way and say that if a person was always 3 feet away, but that's making a big assumption that kids are always 3 feet away. You know, I think the biggest thing that we're trying to do is not distance people from each other this year and be able to be in a learning environment. And I can't say that even with distancing in place last year that kids were always distanced from each other. I think one of the students that was here, I don't think he's here, you know, he was pretty candid about when distancing doesn't happen. And there were times when I was standing in the middle of Greeley High School during class change time last year, and I know Madison and Avery probably can attest to this, that, yeah, the kids are all kind of walking together. You know, you've got hundreds of kids. That was only half the kids last year in the hallway, but it's still going to be that way. So I think it's impossible to make that work. That sounds great on paper. I think the best thing to look at is, do we have multiple ways to make sure that kids are not being quarantined as much? That was one of the biggest complaints I heard. You know, my child's been quarantined 3 times. My own children were quarantined multiple times. I know, it's not good.
We had 8 of them.
Yeah, we can't do that again. We just can't. Because it's one thing to say we're back 5 days a week, and then we have kids quarantined over and over again. That's not really back 5 days a week. So I think the distancing is important, but it's just one of many.
But a standard layout, I mean, the desks nose to nose must be more than 3 feet apart anyway, right? And isn't there a time limitation, like it has to accumulate to greater than 15 minutes within 3 feet?
Well, so the delta now, it can be less than 15, and that's the misinformation that now is coming out of all this, is that true or not? If you're dealing with delta, is it 15 minutes anymore? And they're not giving us that information right now, because I don't think anybody knows. But there are, I don't know how to answer this, Jason. There'll be some teachers in the district that will opt to put kids 3 feet apart still, because they'll feel that that's a more comfortable place for their classroom environment. We're encouraging teachers to do that when it's feasible, but not do that all the time. I don't think that's healthy, especially 5 days a week.
I understand. I thought it looked like an opportunity for us, because that was even without masks, correct? That 3 feet apart?
Right, yeah. So I'll read it again, because I just want to make sure that we're referring to the right one here, for the same thing. It was the fourth one you're talking about, I think. Asymptomatic students who attend school where wearing masks indoors is consistently enforced and who are at least 3 feet away from the individual who tested positive with no physical contact in a classroom do not have to quarantine from the regular school day. For me, that's a pretty loaded one. Yeah. But it does, I mean, it could exempt some kids, but it's assuming no physical contact, in a classroom. I think this is the hardest one of the four to wrap my head around. What exactly does that mean? And when a school nurse is looking at this, did this really happen or not? And a teacher, okay, was the child in the same place they're always supposed to be in? I think it's hard, but it is one way. At the end of the day, could we get them out of quarantine?
How do you monitor that, though?
What's
so
that?
Are we going to get an affidavit from the student that just says, I was definitely 3 feet away from that kid for...
We usually ask students directly. It's not an affidavit, but that's exactly how contact tracing is. Okay, who were you near? Do you remember who you were near? Depends on the age of the student. High school kids can tell you. Middle school kids can tell you. Elementary kids have a little bit harder time sometimes because they're at recess or whatever, and we had to contact trace at recess last year, and we still might this year, but I think with the new SOP, it just gives us more latitude. That one, for me, is more problematic. I think on paper, you're right. If we just kept everyone 3 feet, nobody has to wear a mask, nobody has to do anything else. But I think that in a perfect world, that's great, but in a school setting, it just doesn't really work that way.
Just to be clear, it does say masks are worn. If you are wearing a mask, if you are 3 feet away, then you don't have to. So it's both of those things at the same time. It does not say that if you're not wearing a mask, right? Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. Because that would be a great, I guess, loophole. Like, I see what you're saying there. And I also think that last bullet point is ridiculous, because I think it's really hard to be able to.
Okay. I would, pool testing, you said you wouldn't do it in the high school. What's the logic there?
I think at this point, we are going to find that the vaccination rate is probably high enough so that it doesn't make sense. I think I'm worried about just an opt-in. Are students and parents really going to opt into pool testing at the high school level? I don't know, Madison and Avery, maybe you have, after Jason's done, maybe you can weigh in on that, but I don't get a sense that high school kids will opt into pool testing.
Okay. On the advisory health panel, I would also second the thought of more parents on the panel from various buildings and from towns. After the discontent with the makeup of the ad hoc committee, I would hope that that was more balanced and more parents. I'm pleased to see the Binax testing availability. What is the spacing going to be at lunchtime? Is there any requirement there?
Distance, if you can, is basically the guidance that we've been given. I think at the lower grades, we are going to be looking at kids eating in their classrooms, but with groups of other kids, in order to, safely distance, so if we have to contact trace. Yeah. At the older grades, we're going to be trying the cafeteria out. Okay. It might be, we've got some, thank you, Scott. You want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure.
I think that's important.
Yeah, one of the things that we're doing in the cafeterias as well is you know, when the students become unmasked, one of the mitigation pieces that we can offer, which we have a contractor helping us with right now, is 4-way plexiglass dividers in the cafeteria, which will prevent, you know, which will help with, you know, the seating and the unmasking and the eating while unmasked. So those will be available in the cafeterias. And actually today we found at the middle school that we'd be able to have 200 seats available for students in the cafeteria at the middle school by doing that.
Yeah, the cafeteria, obviously, at the middle school has got different areas, basically 3 distinct areas in that room, so it does make it a little easier. At the high school, I know the principal is talking about multiple areas for eating inside and then outside eating at all the schools, is what we're looking for, especially during the first 2 months. We want kids eating outdoors. I think high school kids were eating outdoors as late as November-ish. Last year, they were still eating outdoors.
Okay. I believe, as a side note, Bonnie Eagle voted to opt for choice for the masks. So kudos to them for that. And then on the topic of vaccine, I personally would not support a vaccine mandate for something like this, where to me the incidence of people being seriously affected is so small. In the case of polio, absolutely makes sense. That's a near certainty of great effect for anybody that contracts it. But in this case, I would not support such a thing. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Madison, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
A couple, I think.
Good.
Oh, there's no microphone. Mr. Rollins. It didn't work. That's cool. Can I borrow your mic real quick?
God, we've invested $1 million in this equipment.
Come
Can't
on,
get
we
it
spent
running?
so much taxpayer money.
Yeah.
Yeah, alrighty. Well, one thing as a student, and I think I can speak for many students, maybe not all when I say this, if it meant that I could go back to school 5 days a week and not have to worry about online school and not learning anything for 3 days, or learning very minimal for those 3 days, I would wear a mask every day, no matter what, whether I had gym, whatever. I mean, I do extracurriculars, I do band. The band practiced in this room, just in the audience, up until a couple days or a couple weeks before our only performance of the year at the end of the year, which we had been practicing the same 3 songs the entire year. So trust me when I say it was not great to work in the hybrid environment. So I am all for going back full time. And if that means fully masked, I think that many, at least high school level students, wouldn't mind, or they would prefer, like, if they could go back to school the 5 days a week, they would be okay being masked doing that, just because a lot of students did not learn a lot last year. The upcoming senior class, it's a scary position to be in right now, worrying about college applications when you feel like you didn't learn a whole lot your entire junior year, which is the most vital year of your high school experience. And I think that kind of speaks levels as to all of us want to be in school full time. There's no question about that. And I think that I agree with possibly it being up to families whether or not they want to be masked. I mean, I'm fully vaccinated. I don't wear masks in stores and stuff like that because I'm vaccinated. I'm not worried about myself because I know that I'm somewhat safe. And I know that many others feel the exact same way. They feel safe and they feel that they don't need to wear a mask because they're vaccinated, which was the point of getting the vaccine. And I agree that not everyone should have to wear the masks, but if enough people are fighting against it and refuse to get vaccinated and are a danger to each other or to vaccinated people or to other students, again? What is this? I get a third mic. I'm really special. Oh my God.
That one's dead too. There you go.
Are they all dead? Wow. I got one last one. Okay. I'll take my 4th mic. We'll just pass it down, I guess, maybe. I am Beyonce. But along with what I was saying, I think that a lot of students would sacrifice, or at least high school level, would be okay sacrificing it because I think it was Jennifer that mentioned it. You're right, we did not get a lot of mask breaks. It was really only lunch, which sucked a lot. But I think we pushed through it, and it was easy to get used to. It was a lot easier, I think, than it is blown up to be sometimes. It's easier to get used to, and I think a lot of students would definitely be in favor of it. Oh, and pool testing. I personally would not do that. I know most of my peers are vaccinated, or at least the ones I've asked, and they probably would not be interested in doing that because they already feel a level of safety that they don't feel concerned about pooled testing. And I don't see that. I personally don't see that as being very popular in the high school, but I would probably get a form of student opinions just to see what they think.
So yeah, I'll start off with pool testing. Personally, I would do pool testing just, as a, just being safe. It's a good thing to do. But you definitely will not get the support needed at the high school. I think it's just, a lot of the kids already are vaccinated. They've gone through all this. They do the masks. And it's just another thing that they have to do. And that will seem unnecessary. So for that regard, I don't think it's going to happen. But my personal opinion on the masks is that the cost of wearing a mask is far less than the cost of an outbreak in any of the schools. That being said, I think that might backfire, especially in the high school. The mic died. Oh, the mic died. Kidding me? That one, I looked at stuff. It's low too.
What is going on with this? I think it's the mic.
We know the lifespan of the
Yeah, it's low. Yeah, so I think, the cost of wearing a mask is far less than the cost of having to go online or having an outbreak. But I think it might backfire if it's pushed too hard, especially in the high school. If we do not make breaks from masks mandatory. Last year, I think the downfall with the program was that there was too much relied on recommendations. And so it was sort of up to the teacher whether, they wanted to give their students a break from masks or take away from their education, as to if you mandate it, then by not giving them a break, they're going against their superiors, which is it's a lot easier for them to make the decision for that. I think, especially high school students will just stop, probably take them off in the halls, take them off when teacher goes to the bathroom, because they're just going to stop caring. And, once you have a high school student that doesn't care, then you're not going to win that. Also, I would provide masks in the halls because, as Jason said, it can become a petri dish if you're breathing in it all day. It gets wet, and I think we could mitigate that problem if we allowed students to switch out their masks throughout the day. That's all I have to say.
Well, I don't really have much else to add that hasn't been already added. I guess that's the benefit of being at the end this evening. I think some things, though, that I want to make sure that I state is that when we come back on the 2nd, I would like to have the data about our vaccination rates for our students, especially in the high school, but ideally any 12 and above, that I would like to then have the mandate divided up between at least pre-K 8, 9, 12, if not between the 3 buildings. And I also like the idea of providing additional masks so that students can change them throughout the day, or encouraging families to bring their own multiple masks if they're more comfortable with that. And that we do need to make sure that our students are having enough mask breaks and enough outdoor time. So instead of having it be a recommendation, have it that the classes do have that worked into their schedule. And I think that's all I have. Yep. But I guess I also agree that I want to really look at changing the language on how masks are being used, and that it is a tool for empathy and compassion and to practice harm reduction for our community, to help take care of our community. It's not about being scared. It's about doing something because we care about everyone who we're in this building with. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Is this one working right? All right. So does anybody else have anything to add before we do a final vote on this?
There's no mics left.
There's no mics left. All right, cool.
I'll talk for you.
Okay. So we again are voting to.
Tyler,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Are we, all of this discussion that has been made, are we putting any changes in the plan? We're just voting on the way that the plan is right now. And anything that's been talked about will be addressed at further meetings.
My hope and ask is that anything that has been brought up tonight will be addressed at the next update, which will be the next board meeting.
Okay.
Well, a point of order on that, though, that we've made some recommendations as far as the makeup of this committee, and
Okay.
we want that thing to get fired up. So I think that I think there's a sense of the committee that we need more parents. We want the students on it. So I don't want to get into a bunch of amendments or something, but I think Jeff and the chairman have a sense of the board on that, and also a sense of the board on regard to metrics and the follow-up. And I'm not sure if there were any other things that we just make sure it's a sense of the board, so we aren't doing a manana thing and are
Absolutely.
firing out right away.
I think it's really important to remember, and Jeff uses this word often, and I appreciate it, is that this is fluid and that we are going to continue to change. So whatever is presented to us will continue to change. Kevin, did you have a point to that?
Only because I have a microphone. Yeah, it's, Peter, as usual, you're spot on. So if that is something that, if you would stipulate to the composition that we talked about, if it's at all possible to launch prior to our next meeting? To at least have names?
I'm going to try. It may not have a full membership. I think that's kind of what I meant. We can always have a meeting, and I've got several people already that that we've been working on, making sure we have representation, but it just may not have all of the membership, and we'll keep working on that piece. But yes.
I just think that it's advisory is proactive, not afterwards. And that piece of the Vermont numbers that you shared, something that makes logical. I probably heard Jennifer volunteering to help you with that, which I think would be great, because if we can have some target metrics in place, it really gives us something to drive towards. What gets measured gets done, and it works this way too.
And it's consistent.
Yeah, and I think the advisory group could help with the metrics as well. That's what I heard.
Okay. Any other questions before we vote? Okay. Okay. Thought that was a hand, not a thumbs up. All right. All in favor to approve the Greeley Grows Green Plan adjustments as presented by the superintendent? Did you get everybody?
I think so, but now opposed.
Oh, so all opposed? Thank you, everybody. So tonight we have a couple other things left in our agenda. One of them is to enter an executive session to discuss a personnel matter, and the other is to have a workshop on committee assignments. Just knowing that it is 9:15, I'm going to table the workshop on committees. I'm still waiting to hear back from a few board members on their committee preferences. I'm also trying to reschedule our retreat, and that we will be handling those final conversations around committee assignments hopefully within the first couple of weeks of September. And so I will follow up with the rest of you regarding that. Thank you for those of you that have shared with me your preferences. So far, it has flowed very nicely. So what I'd like to do is table the workshop and then move to vote to move into executive session. And again, students, you are free after we vote.
I move that we enter executive session to discuss a personal matter pursuant to state statute MRSA 4056A.
I'll second.
Who was the second?
All in favor? Thank you. Dirk, are we good to go? Okay, so last item is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Excellent. All in favor? Thank you, everyone.
Why no discussion?